Well, greetings Commanders, and welcome to the next video, which is a little bit different. Today we're looking at the SRV, the so far only, please Frontier, land-based vehicle that we can use on planetary surfaces. So almost no matter what ship you have used in the past, you've probably been in this thing and had a bit of a drive around. So let's get in and have a bit of a look. So the most obvious place to start is on the outside of this SRV and having a look at the size of the canopy and in fact the size of the wheels. Now, I originally thought that these were maybe not too much larger than a car wheel, but in fact they come up pretty much to my hip. So they are a very large truck wheel with very knobbly tires to obviously get around the surface of the planet. And in terms of the struts, they sort of come from over here and they end all the way here with the elbow joint. So it is an extremely long, I can't touch either end of it. And of course, as we steer the SRV, you can see that entire thing moving itself around with those two gigantic truck wheels. And here, if you look close to the canopy, there is, I would say, probably not quite enough clearance. Hello, Pooch. There's probably not quite enough clearance to actually get the wheels turned to the outside. Excuse me, dog, I'm doing a video. And the canopy itself is, obviously you can see a large round circle. Now to trace the outside of it, I'd have to go around like this, all the way around to the bottom and to over here. So it's actually, well, it's sort of both larger and smaller than what I thought, because you've got a whole human shape that's kind of fitted into there and there isn't a huge amount of room. Here on the side you can see the two headlights, which obviously you can cycle between on and off, and the high beams version as well, and off, which also turns off the tail light, which I'll show you in a second. And here I'm pretty much standing on the moon's surface, so it gives you a rough idea of the size of the SRV compared to a 6 foot tall bloke. Here we have our first view of the thrusters that shoot you off the planetary surface, and you can see that there's 4 of them, and the nozzles are just fairly plain. If I move my head out of the way before I burn myself and then fire them up, you can see the workings of the wheels as they take the weight and release the weight as you fly off. But also there is meant to be a sort of thrust kind of shape that comes out of these, and it's obviously not evident in first person mode. That's only something that happens in free cam or third person mode. But interestingly, you can also see that the wheels inside them, inside the hubs, they have their own thrusters, which are just like a narrow little tube. But you can see that they get activated as you move around in flight mode, I suppose, for want of a better word, for what's effectively a moon buggy. And before we look at more detail on the sides and underneath, you can see the old laser turret thing shooting its way up there. On the side here we have a sign that says cargo chassis cargo unit with a bunch of numbers, impact resistant shell Mark 7 by the looks of things, and some other low detail things that maybe you can read for yourself, because I can't make them out in VR. So if we look at the commander chair itself, it's quite interesting. It's a sort of carbon nano shell, more like a racing seat, that sits with the headrest separate. Obviously headless, hello headless, hasn't got a head, but that's where his head, or her head in this case, would rest. And we can see some rivets down the rear of the carbon fiber seat here, and the fact that it's kind of on one small gas strut, very small one in fact, and then just mounted on a bit of an elbow arm here. So presumably this would provide some suspension and jolt resistance as you're driving around over rocks and things. There's a couple of wires that comes out the back of this little module here and into what appears to be maybe air tanks for the life support, I would imagine. Around the side of this cabin here we have a couple of grab handles that you could reach from Headless's seat, and there's another one there. But of course, you're not actually here. This is a teleprojection, and you know that because if you destroy the SRV on the surface, you're zapped back into the ship. So it's kind of pointless to have anything that the commander can grab onto or move around in, because they're not actually in here, which is a bit weird. Over here, the projection of the SRV and the land is obviously offset a little bit, so that when you're looking at it from this direction, it looks like it's lined up. But from this direction, you can see it's quite offset, about the size of a normal sized dinner plate, and the SRV is a cute little matchbox car that you could pick up and play with. Whereas over here, it's about the size and dimension of a small soup bowl with a sort of hand-sized SRV there in the middle. This is all held on by these weird little gas struts, a couple of little bits of greebling over here, and the underside of the projector is actually reasonably detailed with this two-sectioned or two-leveled material. Over here we have a fire extinguisher, same model as you find in the Asp Explorer, just this one is about a foot in length. And here just a couple of extra struts holding the canopy in place, more handles that are entirely unnecessary, and bits of wiring going into the sides of the SRV itself. Then at the front here we have these, which are presumably sensors, and that's kind of about it. Some lights out the front, lights out the top, and this big handle, which seems to suggest that the cockpit would maybe open this way, but again, it's not really necessary unless you're running maintenance on this thing, because you're not actually physically in the cockpit. And on the struts of the wheels, there's some extremely low texture signage, which is presumably some sort of a warning, but there is no way that you can read that. It's just way too low a texture. And I do have the textures turned up high, if you're wondering, so this is just the way it's made. So now, of course, there's no door for us to walk through because the commander isn't here. So we can just stick our heads through the rear of the chassis here. But what's interesting here is this strut, which holds the majority of the chassis on, has like an I-beam sort of slider mechanism, and it seems like it would go up and down a good sort of 2 feet. And in fact, it looks like it's got a good little locking mechanism there that would slide through there. So interesting little functionality of making the canopy go up and down, which I don't think is actually used, unless maybe when the thing goes into the ship, which we'll see later on. So now as we come towards the rear of the, I guess, cargo / turret section of the SRV, you can see again those arms with the thrusters coming out. They go up a good, probably 9 feet up into the air to the top of that thruster arm, and these massive wheels and their various arms that come out. So if I just show you, here's where the wheel hub is, here's where that first elbow is, and then it comes in and under the SRV to here, and here's the other one on the other side going all the way out to there, and down to here where the wheel hub then sits over here. So it is a really, really large sort of set of struts and things. On the rear here you have your brake lights and reverse lights, there's your reverse light activating. Very important to account for all of the traffic. And here you have a panel that says RT22 and keep clear on the rear of the SRV. And that's about it. And this is about me standing roughly on the ground. So this is what it would look like if you had space legs and obviously an EVA suit and you're walking around on this planet looking at this thing. Now notice something pretty amusing here. This is potentially where like a license plate would go. But if you look at it closely, you can see it's kind of on a bit of an angle. So it seems like the maintenance is not quite up to scratch with these SRVs, and this thing hasn't been mounted properly, which is pretty hilarious. On the sides here, you have some pretty hefty metal clamps, I suppose, probably for either tying the thing down or towing it. They're attached to the chassis. And now let's crawl underneath and have a bit more of a look under here. So here you can see the underside of the cargo bay for the SRV. However, and quite unfortunately, if we deploy the cargo scoop,
deployed,
literally nothing happens, which is a bit of a shame. But if you stick your head up in here, you can actually see why this thing can only carry 2 pieces of cargo. And in fact, I don't even know where it would fit 2 of those large cylinders, because those things in real life are huge. They're probably about the size of those thrusters over there. So fitting 2 of those cylinders into this section here before it gets to the ship and dumps them off would actually be quite a challenge. And up there, of course, you can see the turret mounting, which looks like it's on a slider rail. Again, not functional really, but that's probably a good 8 or so feet up into the air. If I jumped, I could touch the underside of it, but that's about it. And in terms of height of this section from the ground, my head would not quite be touching that cargo bay door, but it would be right above my head. So pretty close, but you could certainly stand up in here, get some shelter from the solar winds, I don't know. And this section, don't ask me physics questions, and this section here is about sort of 3 foot by 3 foot, or about 1 meter or so wide in terms of where the cargo bay could feasibly go down into and scoop up things, but again, it doesn't actually do it. Now, if we stand at the rear here and we recall the ship, we'll see if we can see where it comes in. So to pop in, there it is. We can drive over into its direction whilst I pop down here, and you can sort of see the gear and wheels and things working as they go over the surface. And you can also see which rocks affect the suspension and which are small enough not to actually have an effect on the suspension itself. And many of them you just sort of drive through, which is interesting. But these larger ones you do have to sort of drive over and engage the suspension to get over them, so that's quite interesting to watch as well. Alright, now I'm going to drive in and under the ship, and you can see this UI is again very far out in front of the ship, and again about 5 meters across, and way far in front, probably 10 meters in front of the SRV itself. And the other point of standing out here, well, not only because it'd be boring to be in the driver's seat, but also one of my subscribers, RawPower1, suggested, well, why don't you use the external view of the SRV to actually get closer to the gear. So as you drive under the Asp, you can see that there is a hatch here that says may lower unexpectedly. Now when you back up a little bit, you can actually see the rear hatch, which is like 5 meters up into the air, which is really high up. So I'm suspecting that this port down here will sort of fold down with gear and will fold down with a staircase for you to walk up into the ship, because there's no way that you can get up there without a huge elevator that goes up 4 stories. As we get to the cargo door, you can also see here that it says Universal Cargo Door. And one thing you may not realize, and I probably didn't until I looked at it in this detail, is that the doors open out and to the sides when you're retracting or deploying the SRV, whereas the whole thing flattens and comes down when it is a cargo scoop in space. So it truly is a universal door depending on what you're actually doing. And the other reason I wanted to show you this is what happens to the SRV when you actually board the ship, because it's kind of a weird transformation. So I'm going to back up into the corner as much as I can, and I'll hit the button and you'll see the wheels hang, and then I'll move into the cargo bay, because otherwise it would be on the outside of it, and show you a bit of that. What I might do is get close to that wall there and then stick my head through it and back again to show you how much space there is between those what looks like trifold blast doors and the rear low polygon texture that you see when you actually look at the cargo bay from the inside of the ship. So if you look and see, it gets folded up and lifted up, and most of the wheels just hang down. So here's the bulkhead. If you stick your head through, it's pretty close to the outside low res texture. And if we redeploy the SRV out of the Asp one more time, so you can see I'll duck down a bit, you'll be able to see it come and hang out, and then the wheels will deploy as it takes the weight and drops down. So it's quite sort of interesting to watch all that work, and the thrusters fire very briefly as it lands. And of course the other cool thing to see from this distance might be to dismiss Commander Headless and send him out for milk and cigarettes. So away you go, buddy, as it flies up, and the cargo bay will shut mid-flight before he zooms off. So there we go, Commanders. I hope that you enjoyed that little preview of Spacelegs walking on the planet and an in-depth view of the SRV. Unfortunately, so far the only vehicle in Elite Dangerous, but hopefully that will change in the near future with some sort of huge cargo mining, drilling thing, which would actually be really awesome. And also I'd like to see a smaller version of the SRV, which is more like a go-kart kind of thing with just the turret on top for sabotaging networks and getting in and out really quickly. I think that would create a really cool gameplay dynamic, but we'll just have to wait and see what Frontier does with the land-based vehicles, and hopefully something. So as always, thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe. I'm trying to get to the 1,000 because YouTube doesn't care about you until you're at 1,000 subscribers, so I'm just trying to edge my way towards that. So any extra subs that you can give me really help. And equally on that note, if you're a member of any forums or any discussion groups about ED and VR, if you wouldn't mind grabbing one of these URLs, pasting it in there and sharing the love. Really appreciate it. Appreciate all the comments and the support. I love engaging with you guys. You guys come up with some really cool ideas, some of which, as you can see, I'm putting into place. And stay tuned for more awesome videos. Fly safe, Commanders.